Good evening and welcome to Gravitas. I'm Palki Sharma Upadhyay. Let's get started. These past few days have seen a lot of activity in the world of geopolitics. First, the G7 summit in Cornwall in the UK, now the NATO summit in Brussels, and then we'll see Putin's face-to-face meeting with Biden. What happens this week could shape world affairs for months, if not years. Some clear trends are emerging. The masks are off, the gloves too. China is a clear adversary, and finally countries are saying it in as many words. They see China as a security risk. They want accountability on the pandemic, on human rights, and on the debt diplomacy of Beijing. They've announced a $40 trillion plan to counter China, but they've left one tiny detail unaddressed. Where is the money? Who will pay and how much? Will the world's richest countries put their money where their mouth is? And where does India figure in this new global effort? On Gravitas tonight, we'll bring you the big takeaways from G7 and NATO. Also on the show tonight, 2 new videos and one big cover-up that we've been exposing. The Wuhan lab leak theory is gaining steam. We'll show you a new video from inside the Chinese lab. In Israel, it truly is the end of an era. After 12 years as Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu steps down. We'll talk about his legacy and what the new Prime Minister brings to the table. In Pakistan, the rising donkey population has become a subject of debate in the parliament. We'll tell you why China may be happy with this one. And a young footballer suffers a heart attack on the field. What gives? With the kind of medical support and fitness levels he had, his condition went undetected. How do you know if you are at risk? We begin as always with Gravitas Global Headlines.
German Chancellor Angela Merkel has said Russia and China top the agenda at the NATO summit, saying hybrid challenges like cyber attacks are emerging because of Russia, which impact a lot of countries, including Germany. Meanwhile, President Vladimir Putin has said it is farcical to suggest that Russia is involved in cyber attacks. Indian External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar interacted with the Indian diaspora in Kenya during a visit aimed at strengthening India's ties with the East African country. On Saturday, the minister held a discussion with his Kenyan counterpart, Rachel Onamo, on bilateral cooperation. The Taliban demanded complete troop withdrawal by foreign forces in Afghanistan ahead of the NATO summit, after Turkey reportedly said it was ready to keep troops in Afghanistan to protect Kabul airport. A Taliban spokesman has said that Turkey should withdraw its troops from Afghanistan under the 2020 deal for the pullout of US forces. Myanmar's ousted leader Aung San Suu Kyi went on trial on Monday, 4 months after a military coup. Another trial over sedition charges is slated to begin on June 15th. If convicted, Suu Kyi could face long prison terms, likely lasting more than a decade. Swiss voters have rejected a new law intended to help the country meet its goal for cutting carbon emissions. Plans for a tax on flight tickets and a car fuel levy stand rejected. Switzerland is seeking to reduce emissions to half of 1990 levels by the year 2030. Thousands of Spaniards protested in Madrid against the government's plans to pardon Catalan leaders. In 2017, 12 Catalan politicians were convicted over the region's failed independence bid. According to a newspaper poll, around 63% of Spaniards have opposed granting the pardons, while some 25% have backed it. A Japanese university professor has solved one of World War II's biggest mysteries. The classified US military documents have revealed the location of the remains of executed wartime Japanese Prime Minister Hideki Tojo. The cremated ashes were scattered from a US Army aircraft over the Pacific Ocean, about 50 kilometers east of Yokohama, Japan's second largest city, south of Tokyo. Russian emergency workers fought wildfires across Siberia and the Far East that have covered more than 550 square kilometers of territory. The largest blaze was in Sakha Republic in the far northeast, where 34,000 hectares were on fire. Nine-time champions Brazil have kick-started their Copa America campaign with a comfortable 3-0 victory over COVID-hit Venezuela. Marquinhos bundled in from a corner kick to put the hosts ahead in the 23rd minute, and the result was sealed when Neymar converted a penalty midway through to the second half to score his 67th international goal. Neymar also set up Gabriel Barbosa for a third late on as Brazil extended an unbeaten streak dating back to November 2019. The Phoenix Suns have reached their first NBA Western Conference Finals in 11 years after completing a 4-0 sweep of the Denver Nuggets. 11-time All-Star Chris Paul continued his resurgence with a game-high 37 points, while Devin Booker added 34 as the second-seeded Suns win 125-118. Game 4 was somewhat marred by the ejection of MVP Nikola Jokic in the third quarter for catching Phoenix's Cameron Payne in the face with a reckless swipe.
Two separate events, two different alliances, and one common enemy. China. The G7 and NATO both focused on China. It began with the G7 summit. It's an alliance of the world's most powerful democracies, the US, the UK, Canada, France, Germany, Italy and Japan. They make up the G7. Together they called out China on the Wuhan virus, the human rights violations and the debt traps. Then came the NATO summit. It happened today. The NATO declared China a threat to its security. The NATO chief said that they are not seeking a new Cold War with Beijing, but the NATO military alliance can no longer afford to ignore the threat. So is the West finally united in its resolve to make China pay? What explains this shift? How many of these leaders will walk the talk? And where does India stand in this new global effort to contain China? The answers to these questions make up our cover story tonight. We'll start with the latest from Brussels. This is where members of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO, are meeting. Now, NATO is a Cold War era alliance. It was designed to respond to the threat from the Soviet Union. But the Soviet Union is history. So what is NATO's raison d'etre? Why does it exist? To take on a new security risk, the one that they've spelled out for the first time in public. This is what the NATO chief said about China.
We are not entering a new Cold War, and China is not our adversary, not our enemy, but we need to address together as an alliance the challenges that the rise of China poses to our security. NATO is the strongest, the most successful alliance in history. We have proven again and again that we're able to change when the world is changing. Over the last years, we have implemented the biggest adaptation of NATO since the end of the Cold War. We will continue to adapt with the decisions we are making today.
NATO needs to adapt. NATO Secretary General clearly saying that China poses a security challenge. A communique is expected to come out of the NATO summit. The group has 30 members, and for the first time, all 30 members are expected to agree that China presents a security risk. It's the first time that NATO will admit that it needs to respond to China's acts of aggression. And this is a clear shift for this alliance. Since its inception, NATO has predominantly put its energies on Russia. This shift comes right after the G7 summit in Cornwall, where China was heavily criticized. The Group of Seven, or G7, has discussed and decided to take on Beijing on 3 fronts. One is to cover up of the Wuhan virus pandemic. 2, the human rights violations in China, and 3, the debt traps laid through the Belt and Road Initiative, or the BRI. Now, the G7 wants to attack China on all these 3 fronts. This is what they plan to do. First of all, the hunt for the origins. In no uncertain terms, the G7 has demanded a new investigation. It is a clear rejection of the compromised WHO investigation that concluded earlier this year, the one that labelled the lab leak as the least likely possibility. Now, the G7 wants a new and transparent probe from China. More specifically, it wants details about the research that was being conducted in the Wuhan laboratory. It wants medical records of lab workers, more data on early cases, and more information on samples from the Wuhan wet markets. That's the kind of evidence the G7 is pushing for from China. The second demand is on the issue of human rights. The G7 called China out for its persecution of Uyghurs in Xinjiang, also the crackdown in Hong Kong. And there was no oblique reference this time. China was named clearly. The G7 said China should respect human rights and fundamental freedoms. It's a call that found support from India too. India was attending the summit, not as a member, but as a guest. It signed a joint statement that affirmed a commitment to human rights as set out in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. On Sunday, Prime Minister Narendra Modi of India addressed the summit. He said that India was a natural partner for the G7 when it came to defending democracy, freedom of thought and liberty from authoritarianism, terrorism, violent extremism, and economic coercion. The Prime Minister addressed by video link. So the partnership is cemented and the goal is clear. What's the plan? How will the G7 counter China? Well, that's the third major takeaway from the summit, a $40 trillion plan, 40 trillion, one that directly challenges China's checkbook diplomacy. The plan is called Build Back Better World Initiative, or the B3W, Build Back Better World. The G7 wants to spend billions of dollars to directly compete with China's Belt and Road, and that is our next story. The richest democracies in the world seem to have finally understood that they need to go beyond building narratives, that it will take more than tough talk to counter China. So here's their plan. They're calling it, as I said, the B3W, Build Back Better World. I know it sounds cliched, but this is what they've come up with. A Western alternative for China's BRI, or the Belt and Road Initiative. According to the White House, the B3W will collectively provide hundreds of billions of dollars for infrastructure development in low and middle income countries. Only that there will be more emphasis on the environment, climate, labor rights, transparency. The plan sounds exciting, yes, but who will pay the bill? Here's a report on all you need to know.
Xi Jinping's superhighway to world power. The Belt and Road Initiative is about to face its biggest challenge yet. After realizing that they cannot beat the project individually, G7 member nations have joined forces to counter the BRI juggernaut. They have launched the B3W initiative, Build Back Better World, a global infrastructure plan, the centerpiece of G7's fight back. What does it offer?
Some great discussions, but we're now going to be talking
$40 trillion for infrastructure development in low and middle income nations, from Latin America and the Caribbean to Africa and the Indo-Pacific. This plan will be global in scope and will have different geographic orientations, but the collective focus will be on mobilizing the capital in 4 key areas: climate change, health security, digital technology, and gender equity. The plan also promises to uphold labor rights, transparency, and anti-corruption policies.
What's happening is that China has its Belt and Road Initiative, and we think that there's a much more equitable way to provide for the needs of countries around the world. And so it's a values-driven, high-standard, transparent financing mechanism we're going to provide.
The initiative is noble, but who will pump the money? America hasn't made any financial commitments yet. The Biden administration is still struggling to pass a domestic infrastructure bill. How will it address someone else's problem if it's failing to address its own? Making things more doubtful is the fact that other G7 nations also haven't revealed how much capital they would allocate. Will they risk their huge trade and investment deals with Beijing for Washington? There's no guarantee. In 2019, Italy joined the Belt and Road Initiative, and today it is Europe's third largest beneficiary of Chinese investments. Then we have Germany. It faces the 5G dilemma. In December 2020, Angela Merkel struck a deal with China's Huawei despite opposition. The United Kingdom too is on a treacherous terrain. Just last week, the UK Business Department turned down a draft of recommendations to get tough with China. A Reuters report claims that Joe Biden forced G7 leaders to make strong statements on China, that the White House pushed for a specific language in their respective communication. But there was a spectrum of how far different countries were willing to go. All of this puts into doubt how serious G7 nations are to the B3W cause. They may have hardened their attitude towards China, but will they put their money where their mouth is? The American strategy will have to deal with a patchwork of different interests and insecurities. For some, it may seem less appealing compared to Beijing's all-in-one package of the BRI. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
So some big political decisions were made at the G7, but as always, the summit gave us a few iconic moments as well, from the Queen's banter during the family photo to British Prime Minister Boris Johnson heading out for a morning swim. Here is what unfolded outside the conference halls at Cornwall.
Are you supposed to be looking as if you're enjoying it?
Yes, it definitely.
We ask this question at the end of every summit. Who was the showstopper? Who gave us the most memorable moment? Was it the Queen with her sword? Or Joe Biden, who broke out the jeans and sneakers while hitting the bar? Quite frankly, the leaders were a side note this year because all anyone could talk about was Cornwall. Looking at these pictures, it's clear why. Great beaches, towering cliffs, and incredibly sunny by British standards. It was less like a summit, more of a weekend getaway. The US president said he did not feel like going back home. He was clearly in love with the place. So was the Western media. They showered positive coverage on the county, gushing over the beaches, the trees and the resorts. Reporting on the summit was more of an afterthought. Let me show you what I'm talking about. This is The Guardian's incisive piece on Cornwall. Beyond the beach, discover Cornwall's less crowded attractions. The Independent went a step further. They want you to book a holiday in Cornwall right now. Look at the headline. As world leaders leave Cornwall, it's worth booking a visit yourself. And the BBC, for some reason, was obsessed with the sun. They had a whole image gallery dedicated to the sunshine over Cornwall. If you read these articles, they make Cornwall sound like Shangri-La, the perfect place where everyone is happy. But that's simply not the case. You see, Cornwall is among the poorest places in Britain. 15 constituencies deprived in Northern Europe. St. Ives, where the leader stayed, is a hub of child poverty. You won't find these reports in most Western newspapers, at least not on the front pages. The coverage on Cornwall was an excellent piece of propaganda. The leaders were put inside a cocoon and all Western coverage happened inside it. Nothing on the deserted farmers' market or the dozens of mines that were shut at the start of this century. It's truly jarring stuff. The world's most expensive holiday/summit in a county that has more homeless people than anywhere in Britain. You would think this is worth reporting. So why was the Western media so hesitant? In the past, they've been more than happy to smear summit hosts on the front page. I can give you examples. This is a Los Angeles Times report from 2010, and this is when India was hosting the Commonwealth Games. It accuses India of trying to hide the poor. The Guardian did a similar story. This was last year during Donald Trump's visit to India. The article accuses India of building walls to hide slums. New Delhi called it a security measure. Brazil got the same treatment, by the way, when it hosted the Olympics in 2016. The Telegraph talked about a wall of shame between ghettos and Olympic villages. Now, this has been a recurring trend. Whenever the developing world hosts a summit, such articles pop up. They have the same headlines: hiding the poor, a wall of shame. The problem is not these articles, really. The problem is the selective outrage. Here's a report that got buried under the positive coverage. Homeless people in Cornwall were given temporary accommodation at local hotels, but once the G7 came to town, they were expelled from there. Foreign diplomats and security officers took their rooms, but no front page coverage. No clever headlines about evicting the homeless. And that is the issue. For Western media, poverty is a selling point. They love shaming the developing world as a bunch of ragtag nations. But when the same thing happens in the West, they would much rather talk about the glorious Cornish sun. Well, here's the deal. Whether surrounded by white beaches or artistic resorts, poverty is still the same, and it's about time governments accepted this. Hiding the poor or evicting them does not solve poverty. So why do countries keep doing it? For positive press. During global summits or state visits, the whole world is watching you. It is natural to want a positive spin. But not by building walls around slums. Camera-friendly optics do not last long. And when the facade drops, you end up red-faced, like Cornwall right now. All that glitz and glamour just to hide their most impoverished county. It's a classic case of building a digital ivory tower. Well, here's what governments can do instead. Expose the reality of their society, urge summits and foreign leaders to do more. As for the Western media, the blinkers have been on for way too long. The global north-south divide has seeped into reportage. So they see poverty in Rio's congested shanties, but not near Cornwall's coastal retreat. And in the middle of the G7 sessions and the parallel bilaterals, there was a buzz in the corridors of power about a possible sausage war, believe it or not. Cold cuts have become a bone of contention between the UK and the EU. The situation went out of control when British Prime Minister Boris Johnson asked French President Emmanuel Macron a question about sausages. Macron got the answer wrong. Johnson got so angry that he's now threatening to delay the implementation of a Brexit deal. I know it sounds unbelievable. Take a look at our next report.
It was a sunny day at Cornwall. Two leaders were on the sidelines of the G7 summit. On one side of the table was British Prime Minister Boris Johnson. On the other was French President Emmanuel Macron. They met, exchanged greetings, and then Boris Johnson popped a question. How would you like it if the French courts stopped you from moving Toulouse sausages to Paris?
Here we go.
Macron, they say, was surprised. He did build an appetite for economy, but did not expect to be grilled on sausages, let alone the Toulouse. Prompting Johnson's question was a hiccup over Northern Ireland. Let's pull out a map. This is Northern Ireland. It is part of the UK, but shares its border with Ireland, which is an EU member. While putting meat into the Brexit deal, this territory became a bone of contention. How do you keep Northern Ireland away from the EU free market? How do you erect checkpoints between Ireland and Northern Ireland? The problem was complicated. The solution, not the cream on the crop. It was called the Northern Ireland Protocol. Under it, Northern Ireland remained in the EU Customs Union and adhered to single market rules. The rest of the UK did not. So it was decided that checkpoints will not be erected between Northern Ireland and Ireland. Instead, there will be checks on the goods crossing the Irish Sea to Northern Ireland.
We will do whatever it
Britain
takes.
agreed to the deal, but it is now threatening to delay implementing it. Why? Because EU rules would ban the sale of British sausages and cold cuts in Northern Ireland. This could dent the $19 billion British cold cut industry. You see, sausages are very, very close to the heart of a true Englishman. In 1984, fictional character Jim Hacker ran for Prime Minister with a campaign wrapped around sausages and a pledge to protect the British banger from a new EU regulation.
At the end of next year, we shall be waving goodbye to the good old British sausage, and we'll be forced to accept some foreign muck like salami or bratwurst or something in its place.
But they can't stop us eating the British sausage, can they?
They can stop us calling it the sausage, though. Apparently it's got to be called the emulsified high-fat offal tube.
37 years later, a non-fictional Prime Minister has brought up the issue at the G7 summit. We are back to the table. And Boris Johnson is still waiting for an answer. How would you like it if the French courts stopped you from moving Toulouse sausages to Paris? Macron is thinking about saucisses de Toulouse for those interested. A delicacy from southern France. Spicy, coiled, made of pork, red wine and garlic. The thought of it makes Macron skip a beat. His reply is a banger-manger. That is not a good comparison, because Toulouse and Paris are in the same country. Northern Ireland too is a part of the UK. Macron forgets it. His answer shows no sign of meat.
Le G7 s'est engagé.
There is a Toulouse sausage. We talked about it, but we have many more. I don't want problems with Montbéliard, Strasbourg, or other regions. We defend French gastronomy in all its diversity.
D'ici la fin de l'année.
Boris Johnson is furious. He has threatened to unilaterally extend the implementation of Brexit checks. There are already talks of a possible sausage war. The EU has urged Johnson to stick to the protocol, but Johnson is worried about the bread and butter of its meat industry and also the breakfast platters in Northern Ireland. What will they eat? Egg, bacon and Brexit? Bureau Report, WION. World is One.
And this is one story that keeps getting bigger, the lab leak theory, the possibility that the virus, the Wuhan virus, escaped during risky research projects. The Wuhan laboratory had samples of bat coronaviruses before the pandemic. So what was China doing with these samples? Did they modify them to make a virus that is more lethal? Tonight we have two videos that prove how China was storing bats inside the Wuhan lab and collecting bat coronaviruses, and how Chinese researchers were manipulating them. These revelations come straight from the horse's mouth. Xi Zhengli, the Batwoman of China, and Peter Daszak, the man who funded this research. Take a look.
This is a story of two videos and one cover-up.
And it looks like...
Video number one is from the Wuhan lab in China. What you see is a dedicated animal room inside the lab. Bats are locked up inside cages. A scientist is seen feeding a bat a worm. This video is from 2017. It's one of the many propaganda videos that the Chinese state has produced in the past to showcase its progress in science. Fast forward a few minutes. You'll find China's Batwoman Xi Zhengli herself. She's talking about what they do at the Wuhan lab.
After more than 10 years of research, we have proved that the SARS virus originated from bats. In addition, We have found that bats carry many other kinds of viruses, such as adenoviruses. Filamentous viruses also have other types of coronaviruses. The results of our research provide an important basis for the prevention and control of new infectious diseases in the future.
That statement is a confirmation. The Wuhan lab did have samples of multiple bat coronaviruses. Samples that China's Batwoman, Xi Zhengli, didn't share with the WHO investigators who visited Wuhan in January this year. Why is this significant? This brings us to video number 2, and this man, Peter Daszak, increasingly at the center of the Wuhan lab leak theory. Here's what he said in December 2020. No bats were sent to the Wuhan lab. We collect bat samples, send them to the lab. We release bats where we catch them. This man is the president of the EcoHealth Alliance, an NGO that channeled American funds into bat coronavirus research in China. Conveniently, Peter Daszak also happened to be on the WHO team investigating the origins of the virus on behalf of the WHO. But it seems that he's been muddling the probe. First, he said the Wuhan lab stored no bat samples. Then he got the Lancet to reject the lab leak theory. When the pandemic began spreading around the world, Daszak orchestrated a letter in the Lancet that rejected the idea of a potential leak. But the skeletons are tumbling out of the Daszak cupboard. A conservative website called the National Interest has unearthed a video from 2016. This is where Daszak publicly admitted that the Wuhan lab was modifying viruses to see if they could bind to human cells. The statement fits the description of gain-of-function research.
Then when you get a sequence of a virus and it looks like a relative of a known nasty pathogen, just like we did with SARS, we found other coronaviruses in bats, a whole host of them. Some of them looked very similar to SARS. So we sequenced the spike protein, the protein that attaches to cells. Then I didn't do this work, but my colleagues in China did the work.
So the Wuhan lab was modifying viruses. The Wuhan lab was also storing bat samples. And from Chinese scientists to American funding agents, everyone kept misleading investigators. After the outbreak last year, Xi Zhengli claimed China had no samples that matched the Wuhan virus. Peter Daszak denied funding risky research. Now, both lies have been busted. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
In most countries, law enforcement is a respectable job. It's understandable why. You fight crime and you protect civilians, almost like a hero without a cape. But in the United States, it's a bit more complicated. Last year, American cops were accused of brutality and racism. They came to represent everything that was wrong with the United States. So youngsters are now rethinking a career in law enforcement. They do not want to be cops. Here's a report.
America's finest are in a recruitment dearth. Between a wave of police brutality and calls to defund the police, turns out nobody wants to be a cop anymore.
I think this is probably one of the most challenging times the profession as a whole has seen as it relates to recruitment.
Officer morale is at an all-time low. Cops have become public enemy number one, the symbol of a racist, violent America. It's not a symbol officers want to associate with. So they are leaving en masse. Some departments reported 45% more. And the next generation is hesitant to step in. Hardly surprising, since they've grown up seeing police brutality. It's a departure from decades of American obsession with law enforcement.
It's hard to recruit the very people that are seeing police as an opposition.
That made it hard because the sentiment and how we were viewed, the brand of policing, changed in an instant.
The brand of policing. That's the new catchphrase in America. Cops here look like US Marines with submachine guns, grenades, snipers, and assault rifles. Whether by design or accident, American police became a militia. The idea of a friendly neighborhood cop disappeared. Overkill has come to define American cops. Just look at these numbers. Last year, 1,127 people were killed by police gunfire. 180 of them had a knife. 80 of them were unarmed. Only half of them had a gun. With public opinion shifting, departments are hitting reset. They are switching from offense to defense. How? Using de-escalation techniques. It's true that not every standoff can be diffused, but the idea of de-escalation is to retrain trigger-happy cops, not eliminate violence completely. Some officers have put a spin on the negative press. Their message is this: if everything is so wrong, why not join the force and set an example?
One guy who was outside, he saw us setting up, and he said, now's not a good time to be the police. And I said, why not? And he explained to me what's going on out here in the world and what we're seeing on social media. So I said, so if you got a problem with this, then why not help us be a part of the change?
America's falling recruitment reveals a reckoning. A society grappling with what policing means in 2021. Is it about fighting crime or preventing it? Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
Pakistan's opposition has a new name for their Prime Minister. They're calling Imran Khan the Donkey King. Their words. Why are they doing it though? Because the population of donkeys in Pakistan is surging. The Pakistan Economic Survey says there are now 5.6 million donkeys in the country. What does this have to do with Imran Khan? Well, his government is selling these donkeys to China and raking in millions in foreign cash reserves. But we end up with another question. Why exactly does the dragon need donkeys? Our next report explores.
On Friday, as the Imran Khan government unveiled its budget for 2021, the Pakistan National Assembly broke into chaos, with this slogan echoing in the assembly chambers. These were Pakistan's opposition lawmakers calling their Prime Minister the Donkey King. The question is, why? The answer is this survey. The donkey population in Pakistan has increased by 100,000. It has reached 5.6 million from 5.5 million last year. And this is no ordinary survey. These findings are mentioned in the Pakistan Economic Survey, a study which is meant to assess the many sources of income in the country. For opposition lawmakers, this may be a laughing matter. But for Islamabad, it's a matter of immense pride, because these beasts of burden are raking in millions for the government. They're being exported to Pakistan's all-weather ally, China, where these helping hoovers are considered a prized possession, only that they don't get many opportunities to offer help. China uses the donkeys for their hide, which is used to manufacture traditional medicines. The Chinese say gelatin made from donkey skin has medicinal properties. It is said to nourish the blood and enhance the immune system. The most famous variety of donkey gelatin in China is known as Yijiao. It is produced in East China's Shandong province and sold at a price of 130 yuan per kilogram. That is close to $20. Do you know how many donkeys are slaughtered each year to produce Yijiao? 4 million. In 2017, this mass-scale slaughter dwindled China's donkey population, so it turned to Pakistan, which has the third largest population of donkeys in the world. In 2019, Beijing provided Pakistan with a loan of $42.5 billion, and in return, Pakistan promised to export donkeys to China. Reports say the Imran Khan government had promised to export 80,000 donkeys to China in the first 3 years, with Chinese companies willing to invest as much as $3 billion for donkey farming. It's a win-win deal. China needs donkeys, it's willing to pay billions. Pakistan is going broke, its external debt is mounting, foreign cash reserves are drying up. Only if Pakistan's opposition understood the gravity of the situation and the dire state of affairs.
इंसान और गधे का रिश्ता तो सदियों पुराना है, मगर लाहौर में गधों का कारोबार अचानक चमक उठने से गधा पालने वाले लोग खुशी से फूले नहीं समा रहे। कैमरामैन मोहम्मद सादिक के साथ अमीन हफीज, जियो न्यूज, लाहौर।
Benjamin Netanyahu's decade of dominance is over. He had 12 uninterrupted years as Prime Minister. Like him or hate him, it is difficult to overlook his influence on Israel. He was a cheerleader, a spokesman, and a war hero for his country. So Netanyahu's exit was never going to be a simple affair. Sunday was his last day as Prime Minister. The Israeli parliament convened to vote on the new government. Netanyahu sat through the entire proceeding. He had a deep, pensive look on his face. But around him, things descended into chaos. The new Prime Minister, Naftali Bennett, was heckled throughout his speech. There was a lot of name-calling and cursing. In the end, the coalition won the vote, although barely. They managed to get 60 votes. The opposition got 59. The Israeli parliament, called the Knesset, has 120 seats. So with 60 votes, the government has made it by the skin of their teeth. Netanyahu was watching all of this unfold. He got up from his seat, he shook hands with Bennett and joined the opposition ranks. And with that, Israel's longest-serving leader was out of power. He's not planning on retirement, though. At 71 years of age, Benjamin Netanyahu believes he still has some politics left in him. He plans to continue leading the Likud party.
I have a message. I have a message to those who are joyful in Tehran and to those who do as they say in Hezbollah and in Hamas. The opposition in Israel will have a loud and clear voice, and I have another message for them, just as important.
We'll be back soon. We'll be back.
Well, Netanyahu may or may not stage a comeback, but as younger leaders take center stage, one thing is clear: the era of Netanyahu is over. Even if he returns to power, he may not be the towering firebrand leader he once was. So it's time to look back at his legacy, his complicated and polarizing legacy. Netanyahu first came to power in 1996. His campaign was built on rubbishing the Oslo Accords with Palestine. But the weight of office soon took over. Not only did he meet Palestinian leader Yasser Arafat, he signed multiple deals with him. And this angered his nationalist voter base, and they ousted him after 3 years. Netanyahu's second stint as Prime Minister came in the year 2009. He presided over 3 flare-ups in Gaza: the 2014 war, the 2018 violence, and the 11-day conflict this year. During all these 3 flare-ups, he was accused of war crimes, but it made him more popular among his voters. Netanyahu's biggest impact has been the Arab-Israeli peace deals, what is called the Abraham Accords. 4 Arab nations recognized Israel in 2020: the UAE, Morocco, the Sudan, and Bahrain. It was a diplomatic coup for Netanyahu, and he had Donald Trump to thank for this success. Here's another legacy of Benjamin Netanyahu: a partisan relationship with the United States. In 2012, he courted then presidential candidate, Republican presidential candidate Mitt Romney. This was during peak campaign season. In 2015, he went around President Obama's back and addressed the US Congress. Why? Because he was unhappy with the Iran nuclear deal. The trend is clear: Netanyahu would much rather deal with the Republicans in America. The new government realizes this. Foreign Minister Yair Lapid talked about dealing with quote-unquote angry Democrats in the US. Netanyahu chose to ignore him. Bennett is seeking to engage with them. So what does he bring to the table? Well, Bennett is more hawkish than Netanyahu on Palestine. He says there was never a Palestinian state. Hence, there is no Israeli occupation. If Netanyahu is far right, Bennett takes it to a whole new level about killing Arabs. In 2018, he advocated a shoot Gaza border. They were terrorists, he said, not children. So blocking a Palestinian state is his life goal, some say. Annex the entire West Bank. Right now it seems unlikely. Bennett has a wafer-thin majority. His partners are soft on Palestine. So he will most likely toe the Netanyahu line, manage the conflict with no intention of solving it. What about his approach to India? Well, Netanyahu proved to be a key ally for New Delhi. Under him, India's West Asia policy was dehyphenated, which meant that relations with Israel and Palestine were separated. They would stand on their own merit. This will likely continue under Bennett. Prime Minister Modi has already congratulated the new Prime Minister of Israel. Bennett responded with a message of his own. Both leaders talked about deepening the bilateral relationship, so don't expect radical changes in foreign policy. The big difference, though, is on domestic politics. Bennett has a broad alliance behind him, including an Arab party. He's talking about healing the Israeli society, reducing the rift between Jews and Arabs, the hardliners and the secularists. And this is something Netanyahu never really tried to do. He was happy consolidating his own vote bank. That vote bank still supports him. They still see Netanyahu as their leader. So Bennett has big shoes to fill. He was once considered a protege of Netanyahu. He even served as his chief of staff. There's a sense of respect between the two men. For instance, Bennett does not believe the corruption charges against the former Prime Minister, now Benjamin Netanyahu. For him, this is about a change of guard, not a change of ideology. And that's the issue that Israel will have to reckon with. Much like Trumpism in the US, Netanyahu's brand of politics remains hugely popular whether he's Prime Minister or not. For the next few years, he will be breathing down the coalition's neck. And we cannot end tonight's show without talking about what happened over the weekend on the football field. An international player suffered a cardiac arrest in the middle of a match. During Euro 2020, it was Denmark's opening match. It was playing Finland. The match was into its 42nd minute. Midfielder Christian Eriksen was running near the left touch line, and then he suddenly collapsed. Eriksen lay flat on the field. Players ran towards him. Medics had to double up. Eriksen's chest had to be pumped. He was given CPR, or cardiopulmonary resuscitation, on the pitch. His teammates formed a ring around him to hide the view. Some of them had their hands on their heads. One of the players had to stick his fingers in Eriksen's mouth to ensure he does not swallow his tongue. There was silence on television. Some broadcasters cut out from the live feed. There was a stadium full of people praying, teary-eyed. Eriksen was rushed to hospital. Medics confirmed he had suffered a cardiac arrest. The game was suspended, only to start a series of questions around heart health. You see, Eriksen is only 29 years old. He's uber fit. He plays, he trains, he undergoes regular checks. Surely he eats right. He has a dedicated team just to look after his health, and yet he suffered a cardiac arrest, and no one saw this coming. Eriksen did not even have the Wuhan virus, no infection. So even that possibility is closed. How did it happen then? Unfortunately, the 29-year-old is now stable, but not everyone is that fortunate. When it comes to matters of the heart, can we never really tell? Or are there signs of possible heart problems? How can we prevent them? How do we take care of our hearts? And why should we take heart health seriously? Let's try to answer these questions, and let's begin. What is the heart? It's an organ about the size of your fist. What's the function of the heart? To pump blood and deliver blood to your body. The heart is at the center of what is called the circulatory system. When it malfunctions and stops beating properly, the heart's pumping system stops or is arrested. That is cardiac arrest. It's not the same as a heart attack, technically. In the case of cardiac arrests, deaths can occur more quickly. There are some signs of cardiac arrest like chest pain, breathing difficulty, dizziness, fatigue, loss of consciousness. Doctors say when it comes to cardiac arrest, a patient must receive medical help immediately. Time is extremely crucial, and he or she must be resuscitated immediately, else there is a risk of brain damage and death. Doctors also point out that at times cardiac arrests can happen because of a minor blockage in the artery. So the reasons cannot and must not be generalized. There, of course, are some people who are more vulnerable to heart problems, like smokers, those with a sedentary lifestyle, people with high blood pressure, low potassium or magnesium, people who are obese or have a family history of heart disease or a history of heart attack. Men over 45 are more at risk and women over 55. But like in the case of Ericsson, cardiac arrests can happen and do happen to those outside these brackets. So no matter what your age or gender is, take care of your heart. How do you do that? By making lifestyle changes. America's Centers for Disease Control and Prevention advises keeping blood pressure, cholesterol and blood sugar in check. It says choose healthy food and drinks. Keep a healthy weight, get regular physical exercise and do not smoke. These steps will lower your risk of a heart disease. Make these changes today. Take your heart health seriously. According to the World Health Organization, cardiovascular diseases are the #1 cause of death globally. 17.9 million people die every year because of them. 4 of 5 cardiovascular disease or CVD deaths are linked to heart attacks and strokes. 1/3 of these occur in people below the age of 70. Many of them have been footballers. In 2003, Manchester City player Mark Vivian Foe collapsed. Medics tried to resuscitate him. He was stretchered off the field and he died soon after. Doctors said Foe's death was heart-related. In 2007, footballer Antonio Puerta died at the age of 22. He collapsed on the field in the middle of the match. Doctors said he had a prolonged cardiac arrest. In 2007, Phil O'Donnell died of heart failure during a match. In 2018, it was 25-year-old Bruno Boban. Miracles too have happened. In 2012, footballer Fabrice Muamba suffered a cardiac arrest during a match. His heart stopped beating for 78 minutes before it could begin beating again. Muamba retired from football and he was seen praying hard for Christian Eriksen. Like I told you, when it comes to matters of the heart, we can never tell. All we can do is take it seriously, stay healthy and stay safe. On that note, it's a wrap. We're leaving you as always with Gravitas Images. Thanks for watching.